and happiness. So it's a mimer from Tovshim Mem Gimel 1983. The Haftorah says, Sois osis ba'avayim, I will rejoice surely in Hashem, Togel nafshi belakoi, and my soul will be happy with alakoi. We'll explain the idea about Gila versus Sasoin, and the difference in Shem Yutke Vovke and Shem Alekim, Havaya versus Alakoi. Kihil Bishani Bigde Yesha, because he garbed me in clothings of salvation. Mi'il Tzedakah, a garment or a tunic of tzedakah, of charity. Ya'ateni, he will wrap me. Kichasan Yekarein Pe'er, just like a chasan, like a groom that will be adorned with glory, and v'chakala te'ada keleha, and like a kala dons her jewelry. It's explained concerning this in L'Kutei Torah, and the leaders that followed him in every single generation. And the Rebbe says, Kol nasi b'signoinoi. Every Rebbe had their own phrasing and turn of language and a way of expressing, though they were all expressing the ideas that were already in some way expressed by the predecessor, but or their successor. Still in all, it is distinct and different, the language of each one of the Rabbeim, the way they spoke in their Mamorim. I think the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that without even knowing who exactly authored a certain mimer, just by studying the mimer, you could tell from the style of language, the turn of phrase, and so on, you could tell which Rebbe wrote the mimer. Anyway, getting back to our mimer, third line from the top, the Inyan sois asis umaloshin simcha. The expression sois asis is from the word simcha. It's sois, it's from the word sosain. That's a type of joy. V'chein gam togel maloshin simcha. So to togel is also an expression of joy. Okay, as it's known, shegila hi echad mi eser l'shoynes shel simcha. Gila is one of the 10 expressions that we have in Lashon Kodesh for joy. Amongst them are that the Chazal enumerate. There's in parentheses Gila, Rina, Ditza, V'chedva, V'chulu. So there's all different types of expression, 10 different expressions of joy. So yet the pasuk chooses to use both expressions. There is obviously a difference, like synonyms in many languages, even though they could be generally have the same meaning, but yet there are slight nuances or differences between them. In a similar vein, in Lashon Kodesh, the ordinary simcha versus Gila has a difference in nuance. So he says, the difference between sois osis, the lashon of sosin, and versus the lashon of gilam, who the simcha stam hi begoli. Ordinary simcha is a joy that is revealed and open, and it's evident. A person will dance because of it. He claps his hand, he sings, etc., etc. V'ilu gila, as opposed to the word gila, hib simcha mechusa, it's a concealed, it's a covered joy. Like it says, they will rejoice in trembling. How can it be trembling and joy at the same time? Because externally they are trembling, but internally they're in a state of joy, which is actually something that's associated usually with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, as we will talk about later in the Maimer, that even though Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur outwardly it's a time of awe because of the king and so on, and yet internally there is a state of joy. We need to understand. What is the idea over here in the pasuk? That he begins off and says that there's going to be a revealed joy, and afterwards there's going to be a concealed joy. First of all, either it's a revealed joy or it's a concealed joy, and if it's if it's both, what particular significance does it have? What is the different joys referring to, and why particularly that order, as the Maimer is going to explain. Second paragraph in the Maimer, but the idea behind this is in a pasuk this pasuk of the Haftorah, Sois Osis Koirim B'Haftorahs Parshas Nitzavim. It is read on the Haftorah of Parshas Nitzavim. Shekoirim la'olam l'fnei Rosh Hashanah Parshas Nitzavim. We always read the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes it's Nitzavim Vayelech together, and sometimes it's only Nitzavim, like this year, and Vayelech is going to be during Shabbos Shuvah. In the Isur L'Likkutei Torah Parshas Nitzavim, like it's brought down in L'Likkutei Torah Parshas Nitzavim, about the significance of the fact that always the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah we will read Parshas Nitzavim. Moving for this understood, Inyane Pasuk Zem Shayachim Linyane Rosh Hashanah v'Chodesh Tishrei B'Chlal. The very fact that the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashanah, and not just it's the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashanah, but it's the Shabbos prior to Tishrei in general. We must say that the ideas of this pasuk, Sois Osis, that's the Haftorah of Parshas Nitzavim, have to do with Rosh Hashanah and has to do in general with the idea of Tishrei. So the Rebbe explains a bit in Yehuda explanation this matter. How does this pasuk relate to Rosh Hashanah, and how does it relate to Tishrei in general? In Vark, which is Admar Tzemach Tzedek Boira Torah, that Tzemach Tzedek explains in his Mamorim called Oira Torah, the Akos of Omer Sois Osis. The pasuk says, "Rejoice, I will rejoice." V'loi pirish miha Omer. The pasuk does not say who will rejoice. Lefi, how come? Why doesn't he say specifically who will do the rejoicing? Shehu Maimer HaNavi Bar Klal Yisrael, since it is the Navi who is saying this on behalf of Klal Yisrael, and therefore there's no one specific person or being or entity that's doing the rejoicing. The Koi al Avoidus Kol Echad Ve'echad Yisrael, the Sois Osis of this pasuk is referring to the service of every single Yid. It's in both types of ways that we spoke about earlier, that we have both the revealed joy of Sois Osis and all Yidden, and every single Yid, the Navi says on their behalf that they will also have the Gilu Berada, the concealed type of joy. Even though the Navi is applicable, when it says in the Tanakh, it's applicable to all Yidden all the time. But Ubepratius, more specifically, when does every Yid have the service that entails both an open joy of Sois Osis and a concealed joy of Togel, Zeu B'Chodesh Tishrei, that's in the month of Tishrei. Third paragraph from the beginning. Close the general explanation. This is in a mashakos of Sois Osis, where it says, "I will rejoice." Hainu simcha gluya. It's referring to a revealed joy. Koi ala avoida b'chag hasukos hanikras man simchasein. It's referring to the avoida of the Yom Tov of Sukkos. That Sukkos is known as the Yom Tov of our joy. So therefore, it's applicable to say by it an open and revealed joy. Umashakos of Togel Nafshi, where it says that my soul will be in a state of Gila. That we explained previously, Shehi Simcha Mechusa, it's a covered joy, a concealed joy. Ukamashakos of Gila Barada, like it says, they will rejoice in trembling. Shagila Mechusai De'ara, that the joy is concealed through the trembling. The Zekoi al Avoidas Rosh Hashanah, it's referring to the Avoid of Rosh Hashanah. So the Rebbe is going to explain why on Rosh Hashanah is there any joy at all. That it's an idea of trembling. We understand we're standing in front of the king, but why is it a matter of joy whatsoever? The Tam Asimcha Rosh Hashanah movement Pashtus, the reason for the joy on Rosh Hashanah is understood simply. Shari b'yom zeh omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On this day of Rosh Hashanah, Hashem says, Imru lefonai malchis, say before me verses of Melucha, that we say in the Musaf davening on Rosh Hashanah. we say 10 psukim from Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, from Tanakh, that speak about Hashem's kingship. And why does Hashem ask of us to recite 10 psukim or why does Hashem ask us to recite psukim of Malchus, of kingship, so that by reciting these psukim, we will make me, Hashem says, you will make me king over you. That this is done through the recitation of psukim of Malchus, that we are accepting Hashem as king over us. Why is it necessary for us to make him king? Ki ein melech b'lo, because there's no king without a nation. Hashem cannot be a king without people, subjects that accept him and over whom he will be a king. The meaning of the word Chassidus always explains is malashon oimimus. Oimimus means like extinguished coals. When a coal is not extinguished, it's not seen as a separate entity. It's all absorbed and consumed in the fire. When the coal is extinguished or dark, so then it looks like separate entities. The same thing, a nation, looks like something separate from the king. And for a king to be a king, there needs to be a separate entity, that's the nation. So that's why Hashem, who wants to be king, needs us to proclaim him as king. HaKadosh Baruch Hu roitz eliyas melech al amis al Yisrael, and Hashem wants to be a king over the Jewish people. Therefore he comes with a request. And the Rebbe adds parenthetically, the very fact that Hashem asks this of us, this is also an empowerment Yisrael for the Yidden, that they shall make him a king over them. The very request that Hashem makes to us, that we should be making him a king, means that this is within our capability. We can do this, we can make him a king. And now, in that process of making Hashem a king, which is exemplified by the psukim that we recite about Hashem's kingship, but the actual coronation takes place with the shofar. The shofar, the primary aspect of making Hashem a king is through the blowing of the shofar. The mitzvah hayom b'shofar, because as we know, the mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah, every Yom Tov almost has its unique mitzvah to that Yom Tov, in addition to all the other halachas that it shares in common with other Yom Tovim. The mitzvah of the day of Rosh Hashanah is shofar, and that shofar blowing is the means through which we make Hashem the king that he wants to be a king over us. And the reason why this is the shofar that is the operative thing in making him a king, so he says, like we said before, the fact that there's no king without an that oimimus means extinguished or darkened coals, meaning that they have to be separate and far away from the king. Like in other Mamorim, he speaks about a king can't be a king over children, or he can't be a king over officers and ministers because they're too close. They need to be a distance from the king. Since a shofar is from an animal, and in the animal kingdom itself, it's from the inanimate part of the animal kingdom. The shofar was separated and cut off from its source of its life. Therefore, it indicates in the entirety of the world that the shofar is something at a distance from the person. Just like the nation needs to be a distance from its king to coronate him. Not only is the distance indicated by the fact that we blow shofar, which is made from the inanimate, from a dead part of a living being, which a living being, an animal, is very far from a person. And the dead part of the animal, the part that was disconnected from the animal, is even further from a human being that's a living, breathing, intelligent person. In addition to that, What does he do with the shofar? He does with the shofar the least and the lowest type of activity that a person could do. And the person himself had a maisat by a person himself, the action of the tkiya is not done and accomplished through his elevated powers. We don't use our intellect, we don't use our emotions, we don't sit and think and meditate on Hashem and express in ourselves a love for Hashem. But literally, the shofar is a simple sound. It's not a very articulate and a very complex type of orchestral arrangement and so on, which again indicates something very low and distant in comparison to the person, just like the people in comparison to the king is very far and distant. Until it has to be an action and a literal sense of toil. There needs to be a physical effort and that's exerted in doing it. Again, not emotional, not intellectual, a physical activity. Like it's brought down in the Arizal's writings, that if the face of the Baal Tekeya has to turn red with the effort. What is the fact that the face of the Baal Tekeya turns red? What does it indicate? This indicates on a great effort of the one who is blowing the shofar in the action, in the activity of the blowing. Hainu, this means that he should so yiskakros, meaning he stakes himself and he inserts himself. The person invests himself so much in this idea of the blowing of the shofar, until the blood that's inside of him, the blood that's usually hidden inside and is not evident outward, will come outward, not leaving the body, but as much outward as possible without leaving the body, and his blood and his face will turn red. Meaning the concealed parts is becoming manifest. That's the joy of Rosh Hashanah. It's the joy of the fact that the Yidden are coronating Hashem as a king. Yet this joy is no sense of trembling. Because when one coronates, it's through accepting the yoke of the king. Accepting the king upon me is an ra'ada, Vince's trembling and awe and reverence, etc. So that is the Gila part, and that is Rosh Hashanah. Last paragraph on the page, Vini Achri Avodah, close the Rosh Hashanah v'Chag HaSukkos, after the general avoid of Rosh Hashanah and the Yom Tov of Sukkos. Because the Yom Tov of Sukkos is Sois Os is Goimer, the rejoicing that we said earlier, that Sukkos is Simcha, that's revealed, Zman Simcha Seinu. And Rosh Hashanah is the Tagil Nafshi, it's the Gila, the concealed joy. It's necessary that the matter should come down in the specifics of their avodah, that once we had the whole avodah of Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, the avodah of Tishrei, now it needs to manifest in the details of a person's avodah. Because of that's why the pasuk continues in the Haftarah. He garbed me in clothings of salvation. In general, we know from Tanya, in the beginning of Tanya, chapter 4, it speaks about that the mitzvahs are considered the garments of the soul. The fact that mitzvahs are considered garments, this refers to all mitzvahs. Koil mitzvahs Talmud Torah, including also the mitzvah aspect of Talmud Torah, even though in Tanya explains there's an aspect of it that's a mitzvah, that's a makif, there's an aspect of a pnimi, there's Talmud Torah that's food. Talmud Torah that's garment, but it's definitely also a mitzvah like a garment. The mitzvah that the mitzvah of Torah study he be'ofen the yichud nifla ma'adam ha'makayma. It's an unbelievable union with the person that fulfills it. Like again, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya Perek Hey, chapter 5 in Tanya, that when a person absorbs Torah in their mind, so then their mind and Hashem's mind become completely intertwined. My thought encompasses Hashem's thought, and Hashem's thought encompasses my thought, and there's no other union like it to be found. So he says that I know the afsha mitzvah ba'ifin levushim makif, though mitzvah is in the way of a garment and it's an encompassing thing, like mitzvahs in general is something that encompasses the person and surrounds the person. I don't usually do a mitzvah in my body, I do it around and in the outside of my body, except for Torah study, but it's still coming from the outside in. Mikol Makom, still in all, even though a mitzvah comes from the outside, Harehi Po'eles Ba'adam Kulei B'Pnimiyusai, it still influences and affects the entire person, and it affects him in an internalized fashion. Similar to what's explained in Tanya in chapter 48, Perek Memches, concerning Soiviv Kolalmin, the transcendent light, the light that encompasses all the worlds. Why is that light called encircling and encompassing? Only in regards to the fact that we do not perceive it. It's beyond us. It's transcendent in our comprehension of it. Despite the fact that we are calling it soiviv and makif, it doesn't mean that it's not within the worlds and within us. Alter Rebbe explains even that transcendent and encompassing light of Hashem gives life and vitalizes the entire world internally and to the innermost level of it. So why do we call it encompassing? Encompassing is only concerning the revelation. It's beyond. The same thing mitzvahs, the Rebbe says. Mitzvahs really permeate us and influence us internally, but we don't feel it internalized, and that's why we call mitzvahs as garments. 3 lines from the bottom of the page, and these garments, that these are the mitzvahs, nikru bigdei yesha, they're called garments of salvation, because they're drawn down from very, very high levels of light, called the 370 lights of above that's higher than Seder Ishtalshus. Okay, let's skip the parentheses to the last line. Mamshech b'kosav, and the pasuk continues over there in the Haftarah, Me'il tzedakah yateini, he will wrap me in a tunic of tzedakah. The inyan halavush and the mitzvahs nimshach lamata, that the garments of mitzvahs comes down below, and not just below, but lamata mata, doubly below to the lowest levels, ad lebechinas me'il, until the level of the tunic. Now, if we look at the tunic of the Kohen Gadol, we see how low it reached. The idea of the tunic of the Kohen Gadol was that at its bottom of it there were bells. Why were the bells at the bottom of the garment of the Kohen Gadol? So that you could hear the sound of the Kohen Gadol approaching when he came into the holy. This again indicates it's being drawn down and being revealed very much below until the lowest place, b'shulei ha'mi'il, in even the bottom of the tunic. So therefore, mi'il tzedakah comes to teach us about the mitzvahs that are reaching to the lowest level. He says in the 3rd line from the top, the inyan zeh ba'avodas ha'adam hu inyan tzedakah. This idea in the avodah of a person, what of all the mitzvahs indicates the lowest part that it reaches is the idea of tzedakah, me'il tzedakah, the tunic of tzedakah, like the pasuk says, ki tzedakah payeles b'makim achi tachtim. Tzedakah influences in the lowest place, because about someone who has, that's sharing with someone that doesn't. in the most basic necessities, in the lowest most things. Vishkula tzedakah can call a mitzvahs, and tzedakah is equal to all the mitzvahs. So tzedakah represents, by its reaching so low, that what the mitzvahs in general are, just like the tunic is about the bells at the bottom that reaches to the lowest part, same thing tzedakah, and by extension, all the mitzvahs is about reaching all the way down below. V'oidzoi is another idea that we find about tzedakah, that tzedakah, ma mitzvah shadam oichel periseim b'olam hazeh v'akeren ke'emes l'olam haba. Tzedakah is of those mitzvahs that a person eats their fruits in this world, and the principle remains for the world to come. What does that indicate? In addition to the transcendent and encompassing level of the mitzvahs that we spoke about before, that mitzvahs is a level of garments. There's also the aspect of the mitzvahs that is influences internally, like we spoke about before. The mitzvahs, even though they are encompassing, even though they are garments, they still affect internally. That's why he uses the term Adam Oichel Periseim Ba'olam Hazeh. That he eats, he consumes their fruits in this world. Consumption, eating, indicates that it's being internalized. So even though tzedakah and mitzvahs in general is something that's a garment that encompasses the person, but it also affects the person internally as well. Second paragraph on the second page. The ultimate purpose and intention is there should be a total union of Hashem and the Jewish people, not just in the way of garments. We know that through the mitzvahs we become joined with Hashem. But if it's a garment, so it's not a total unity. Just like a person wearing a garment, it's not completely united. What we want is that the Hashem and the Yidden should be joined entirely beyond just a level how garments are dressing a person. This is what he continues in the pasuk, like a chassan that will adorn himself with majesty and beauty, and like a kala will be dressed up in jewelry. We know that the Yidden and Hashem are like a groom and a bride. The Hashem is the groom and the Yidden are the bride. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the level that goes on the spheres, the midas of Atzilus, known as Zeir Anpin, the minor faces. That is primarily divided and breaks down to the three emotions of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, kindness, stringency, and glory and beauty. Because of that, he says, in this phrase, like a chassan, that he will be adorned with pe'er, with glory and beauty, is hinted these three midas. The level of Yechayin is in the word Koyin. Koyin Isha Chesed. It's brought down that Koyin is a man of kindness. Koyin, Levi, Yisrael is Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. Upe'eru Inyat Tiferes. And the word Pe'er, glory and beauty, is in the word Tiferes. So when it says Kichosn Yechayin Pe'er, it's referring to the level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the level of Zeir Anpin, the Midas, which want to join with its Kala, which is Malchus, which is Knesset Yisrael. Like a kala adorns herself with jewelry. It's the sphere of malchus that beautifies itself with the jewelry of a queen. That's the idea of the union of a chassan and kala, because malchus is the source, and the shamas Yisrael, the way they are all as one and together. There's actually a very interesting analysis of this phrasing that he says. It doesn't say like a kala adorns herself with her jewelry, but rather it adorns the jewelry. Usually, the kala beautifies herself by putting on beautiful jewelry. But the way the phrasing of the pasuk is that the kala, which is a level of malchus, makes the keleha, the jewelry, beautiful. What does that mean? The sphere of Malchus mikashetes es keleha. It is beautifying, it is adorning its vessels. Its vessels means those that receive from Malchus. Who are those that receive from Spheres HaMalchus? Shem Neshamas Yisrael b'yos Neshamas begufim. Neshamas of the Jewish people, the way they are Neshamas and clothed in bodies, they are called the vessels for Malchus. So we see this again, this union and this joining between the Chassan and Kala, between Hashem and the Jewish people. Third paragraph on the page. Vayde binyan Spheres HaMalchus, through the building up of Spheres HaMalchus. This is also part of the union of Malchus and Zeir Ampin, and that is done shetamlichuni aleichem, when we fulfill Hashem's request that He asks of us that you should make me a king over you. Poyalim begimul oilmus bia, we affect in the three worlds following below Malchus bri yitzirasiya, that it should be like we say in Rosh Hashanah davening, sheyiyah maloicha al oilam kuli b'chvaydecha, you should reign on the entire world in your glory. And how do we affect this? Why they have avoid the begimul akavim shalem oilam oimid. It's through the avoid and the three lines that upon those three lines the entire world stands. In other words, Torah, avoid and gimel chasadim, Torah and service of Hashem, davening and korbanos, and doing acts of kindness. The Bechlolus Amar Azal Basar Amars Nivra Olam, though in general the Chazal say that with 10 utterances the world was created, Shem Keneged Esa Spheres, these correspond to the 10 spheres. But even the 10 spheres themselves are divided into three lines. Aval Kichem Shas Spheres Mischalkim Bechlolus Legimel Kavim. Just like in general the spheres are divided into three lines. It says, for example, Chochmah is on the right, Bina is on the left, Das is in the center, Chesed is on the right, the Gvur is on the left, Tiferes in the center, and so on. There's three lines in the 10 spheres. So too, the worlds that are proclaiming Hashem's kingship and over whom Hashem is king also has the idea of the three lines. That's why also the world has to stand on three lines, on three pillars. I know you look at your calendar, you see there's 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, but in truth, there's really 3 days of Rosh Hashanah. How is there 3 days of Rosh Hashanah? The Rosh Hashanah Atzmi Hu Beis Yomim, Rosh Hashanah itself is 2 days. Skip the parentheses to the next line. Vayom Hashlishi Hu Yom HaKippurim. The third day of Rosh Hashanah is Yom Kippur. Hanikra Rosh Hashanah B'Yecheskel K'Mevor B'Chudei Torah, and Chudei Torah it's explained that in the Vos Yecheskel, Yom Kippur is also called the Rosh Hashanah. It calls it Rosh Hashanah. It's referring to Yom Kippur and uses the term Rosh Hashanah. So we see Yom Kippur is also Rosh Hashanah. In the brackets, he explains that there is an inner level of Rosh Hashanah and an outer level, and that's the difference in Yom Kippur versus the 2 days Rosh Hashanah. But in general, Rosh Hashanah, there's 3 days Rosh Hashanah. You have something new to say by the table. 3 days of Rosh Hashanah, not 2. Skip the brackets, another 3 lines down. This influences and affects the 3 days of Rosh Hashanah, effects on the 3 pillars that upon them the world stands. Skip the parentheses to the next line. To such a degree, through our doing the avoida in these 3 lines of Torah, avoida, and Gimel Chasadim that the world stands on, Poyalim sheyiyah ha'olam b'ofen shel achdus echad. We influence the fact that the world should be in a way of unity, of oneness, in the way of a single thing. Like the Rebbe many times explains that when you have just the number 1, we only have 1, but we don't know that there is a unity between disparity. You have 2, you have division, you have 2 different things. You have 3, there's the 3 is the purpose of number 3 is to join the 2 disparate things. So true unity is when you have 3 because it's number 3 is coming to join the other two together. So by having the 3 lines and the 3 avodas and the 3 pillars upon which the world stands, we make a unity and a complete unity of Yachid, which is higher even than the unity of Echad, upon which the world becomes joined. He says the second paragraph from the bottom, V'zeh sois osis ba'avaya. That's where it says that I will rejoice in Havaya. The Nemar kan pamayim loshen simcha. It says sois osis. It doesn't say sois ba'avaya, but sois osis ba'avaya. It says twice an expression of joy. Pam habeis nemar osis. The second time it says osis. So there's different ways of translating osis. The simple meaning of the osis of the pasuk means osis, I will rejoice. Rejoice, I will rejoice. But the way the Maimer is explaining it is osis shu poyel yoitze, meaning I will make rejoice. Hainu shu poyel as a simcha ba'acher. You remember we said that the Navi is speaking on behalf of on behalf of Klal Yisrael, on behalf of every single Jew, and every single Jew will make another joyous. What is it referring to? It's referring to the time of our rejoicing. The time of our rejoicing, which is Sukkot, the time when we make Hashem rejoice. Like it's known, the Mashra Kosev, Zman Simchaseinu Loshan Rabbi. Why does it say the time of our rejoicing? Why doesn't it just say Zman Simcha instead of Zman Simchaseinu in a plural? Gam al Shem Yismach Havaya b'Maisav. Just like it says in the pasuk Yismach Yisrael b'Oisav, that Yidden rejoice with Hashem, so too Hashem rejoices with the Yidden, with those that He made. So that's why it says Zman Simchaseinu in the plural, because Sukkot is not just a Yom Tov where we are rejoicing, but it's a Yom Tov also where Hashem rejoices. Now we can understand why it says Osis, because we are not the only ones rejoicing. That's the sois. The second thing is Osis. We are making Hashem rejoice. So it's not just our rejoicing and our happiness on Sukkot, but it's also us as we're making Hashem happy. That's also why he says specifically the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Shem Havaya Davke, specifically the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Al Derech Mashenemar Yismach Havaya B'Masav, similar to what it says in that pasuk, that Havaya will rejoice in his makings, meaning in Klal Yisrael. On the other hand, the second part where it says V'togel nafshi balekoi, it says my soul will rejoice not behavayim but it says belekoi. The koi al avodah de Rosh Hashanah is referring to the avodah of Rosh Hashanah, like we said before, where the joy is concealed in trembling. That's why since it's talking about the rejoicing on Rosh Hashanah, it says Elekoi, not the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, but Shem Elokim. Because on Rosh Hashanah it says that Elokim arises with the blowing of the shofar. Elokim Davke. And then when we have the avodah of, like we said before, we have the sois osis ba'avaya of Sukkot, and we have the togel nafshi belekoi of Rosh Hashanah. So we said all of this needs to come down into the details of our Torah mitzvahs. We come down to the detailed matters of being enclosed in clothing of salvation, like we said before, that all of this experience of Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot has to express itself in mitzvahs the way it comes down into the lowest level, like we said about the tunic with the bells, that it comes down all the way below. So now the Rebbe is going to pose a question about the order of the pasuk. Shouldn't first the beginning of the pasuk be about Rosh Hashanah, Togel Nafshi Belakoi, and then it should be about Sukkot, Sois Osis Bavaya? Why does it say the opposite? Last paragraph on the page, yet Lefizi yesh lahavin tam seder pasuk. We need to understand the reason for the order of this pasuk. Shenamar sois asis lifnei tagel nafshi. It says rejoicing before the my soul, being the happiness of Gilad, the Mekivin, Shesois Asis Koyals Masvaseinu, since the pasuk of Sasig. The revealed joy is referring to the time of our rejoicing of Sukkot. V'sagel nafshi kol Rosh Hashanah, and the Gila, which is concealed joy, is referring to Rosh Hashanah. Yitzarach lahagdim tchila tagel nafshi. First, he should have said about the soul being in the way of Gila, which is Rosh Hashanah v'acharkach loimer sois asis, and afterwards say the expression of Sasain, which is on Sukkot. Even more, it's not understood. Since we read after of Sois Asis before Rosh Hashanah, from this it's indicated that even prior to Rosh Hashanah there has to be the rejoicing. According to what we just now said, the Sois Asis has to do with the time of our rejoicing after Rosh Hashanah. So not only is it out of order, it should have been Rosh Hashanah first, which is Tagel Nafshi Balakoi. Then it should have said Sois Asis, which is Zman Masenu. We're not even reading it on Rosh Hashanah. We're reading it before Rosh Hashanah. Before Rosh Hashanah, what are you talking about Sukkot now? You should be talking about Rosh Hashanah. Yeshleim Rabbi the Rebbe says, we say the explanation this is Mishum Shavoida the Rosh Hashanah Cholu. How do we do the avodah of Rosh Hashanah? It has to be prefaced by joy, the joy of a mitzvah. Where's that fit in? We know on Rosh Hashanah we are accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. The Chazal said, Kablu Malchusi v'acharkach the order of things is, first, you need to accept my kingship. Then I can give you decrees. It says a whole story about a chacham that saw a king came into the country. He said, tell us what to do. He said, first accept me as king, then I'll tell you what to do. That's the reason why we say Shema before V'hoim Shemaya. Shema is acceptance of Hashem's kingship, and V'hoim Shemaya is about doing what we're supposed to do. The Mezem move on top of the next page, last page. From this understood, the K'moisha B'kiyam Agzeir is just like in fulfilling Hashem's decrees. Shehema mitzvahs, that's the mitzvahs. Tzarech li is simcha shal mitzvah. When I do a mitzvah, it has to be the joy of the mitzvah. Al derech zev alachas kam v'kama, in a similar vein, and how much more so should tzarech li is inyan ha-simcha b'kabol so malchus b'chlal. There needs to be the joy in the acceptance of the yoke of his kingship in general. So we're about to accept his kingship on Rosh Hashanah. So if we are joyous in the mitzvahs, we have to be joyous during the acceptance of his kingship. Therefore, though in time, chronologically, first there has to be the concealed joy of Rosh Hashanah and then revealed joy of Sukkot. It's already emphasized prior to that. In the Haftorah prior to Rosh Hashanah, it's emphasized that there is a very great joy just for accepting Hashem's kingship. True, at the time of Rosh Hashanah, we don't have that explicit and evident joy, so we have to do it before Rosh Hashanah begins. Just like like it says about Adam Adishon, that the one who formed you made you happy in Gan Eden early on. What was the joy? So the Rebbe gives an interesting concept behind this joy. What was the joy over there in Gan Eden with Adam Adishon? The joy was that Adam Adishon coronated Hashem as a king on the entire earth. And Adam Rishon addressed all creations, and he told them, come, let us bow and kneel and bend our knees before Hashem, our Maker. So that is what Adam Rishon proclaimed, and because of that, there was the joy involved in that. Especially after Matan Torah, which after the revelation, that says that you revealed yourself upon the mountain. We say this in the Rosh Hashanah davening and Musaf davening about Hashem revealing Himself to the Yidden by Matan Torah. What was that revelation indicating? Then it was nullified, the decree that prior to Matan Torah, those below could not rise higher. And therefore, because of that nullification of that decree, there is even more that idea about the creations being able to kneel and accept Hashem. Adam Rishon began that, but only after Matan Torah was this truly being able to be put into actuality, and therefore there was the possibility for true joy about that. From this we come speedily to the idea that I will make rejoice in a future tense. The Batika Ya'itmar, it says this in concerning the level of Atik Yom and Begili Pnimius Atik L'Asad, about the revelation of the inner level of Atik when Mashiach comes. Then we'll have the true joy that the Haftarah is referring to, that I will rejoice. Asis is a future rejoicing, the rejoicing of Mashiach's time.